Good morning. My name is Elaprolu. I'm part of AWS public sector team. I head up our IoT activities worldwide, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Nithya, who's the CEO and co-founder of Nextleaf, one of our customers as well as partners. But before I turn it over to Nithya, I want to give you a little bit of context as to, especially for those that are not familiar with AWS. Amazon Web Services is the cloud computing division of Amazon. We're supporting customers across every vertical imaginable. In fact, over 1 million active customers on top of the platform in 190 countries, including 22,000 and more and growing rapidly not-for-profits around the world. The smallest of the not-for-profits all the way to the biggest of NPOs and NGOs around the world. We're extremely thrilled to be here. We're looking forward to a productive day, and past couple of days, in fact. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nithya, have her introduce herself and talk about what Nextleaf actually does. What's your mission? What are some of the innovative things that you guys are doing in this space?
Great. Thanks so much, Sri. And just to get us started, so Sri and I are really excited to have this conversation on stage, and it's really just a back and forth between us to kind of talk about some of the aspects of collaboration between public and private companies. So to give you a little bit of background, Nextleaf Analytics, we are a lean tech nonprofit, 30 people across 3 continents, and our focus is on bringing sensor and analytics platforms to solve some of the biggest global health challenges out there. So I'll just give you a brief example. One of the areas we work is in vaccines. It turns out vaccines have to be kept cold. Temperature gets too hot or, surprisingly, even too cold, and the vaccine can get damaged and will no longer work when it gets to the child. So every year, 120 plus million babies a year are born and need to be vaccinated. And increasingly, studies are showing that a large number of them are getting vaccines that are not totally potent. So we built Cold Trace. Cold Trace is a sensor, real-time sensor technology that goes into refrigerators, sends out real-time alerts, and a really important component of this is the back-end platform. We're really excited to be a Fast Forward alumni, and really thrilled to be here. And what's been really exciting is to see the scale of Cold Trace, in part with AWS, actually. So in India alone, the Ministry of Health has installed our technologies across over 13,000 health centers. And this has brought protection of vaccines for more than 12 million babies a year born in India alone. We're now working with Google.org and others to actually bring this platform to 20 countries by 2020. So it's been a really fantastic sort of experience to grow this technology platform from a very small prototype in my garage to now this really global scale technology. And so what I wanted to talk about today that I was really excited about is, at Nextleaf, we're interested in how do you make problems go away? Literally, how do you take this problem off the table? And so for us, we work in vaccines, we work in energy access, cook stoves, increasingly with smallholder farmers. We're taking these big problems and we're saying, how do we ensure that problems like these just disappear? And increasingly what we're seeing is that we need better collaboration. As a nonprofit sector, we haven't done enough to really think about how do we increase our ecosystem and start working with bigger companies out there. So, the first question that actually I have been asking Sri since we first started talking is kind of if you could talk a little bit about how Amazon and AWS specifically thinks about more innovative partnerships. So growing beyond just a customer one-to-one to really a more innovative, more joint product development partnership.
Yeah, so the primary mission at AWS is to create technology services that our customers, whether it's partners, direct customers, et cetera, can use. Even internally at Amazon, we use to make things move faster, make them more innovative, and reduce cost, improve security, better scalability, right? So there are some core tenets that we work off of. That's our core mission. Now, we don't stop there. While that platform is supporting lots of customers doing a variety of things, mission-critical systems around the world, we also go beyond that. In certain cases, depending on For example, let's say there is a particular problem that an NPO is facing, and our platform could be potentially helpful. We go beyond that. So I'll walk you through some examples of how we do that. Especially on the NPO side, we know funding could be challenging, resources could be a challenge, so therefore we have resources on our side that are set aside to help startups and help NPOs get off the ground. An example, every year, every NPO that's qualified under 503C, as qualified as a not-for-profit in the US or equivalent in other countries, we have a global program where we can support those institutions up to $2,000 in credits every year as a starting point. If the idea that the NPO is working on is challenging and interesting and it has potential for global change and impact, we can go on a case-by-case basis much, much higher than that. Now, that's a program that's available for anyone to take advantage of and start leveraging cloud and the capabilities that we bring to bear that are being leveraged in the largest of enterprises down to impacting and doing social good. We also have initiatives where we go even further. An example of this I'll walk you through is what we're doing with American Heart Association, AHA. So Heart Association, as you guys probably know, is in the mission of improving heart health and educating general public about good practices and good things, good behavioral things, as well as working with the research community in coming up with planning and for example, prescription medication and other types of activities that may be helpful in heart healthiness, right? So that's their primary mission. What they wanted to do is, rather than being reactive, they wanted to build a predictive or more of a precision medicine platform on top of a cloud or technology platform. That is an area where we saw that AHA has the mission and the subject matter expertise when it comes to heart health and medicine in general. We have technology expertise. So why not collaborate and make that vision a reality, where we sit down with the teams at AHA, work hand in hand, understanding what the outcomes are that the customer, in this case AHA or partner, to be honest, is interested in deriving, and making sure that we can actually deliver on the technology side, using the best practices from all of the industries that we work in, bringing those engineering resources to work alongside AHA, designing things from the ground up, and helping them build and actually move into operational state. That's an area where it's not a typical customer-vendor relationship. It goes much beyond that. At the end of the day, the reason why we do these is because if you look at there are, I would say, probably 3 primary reasons. One, it's an initiative that has potential for global impact in a positive way, right? This one does, check the box. It potentially could be innovative, where our subject matter expertise can be valuable in moving the ball forward. So that's another interesting area for us to get involved. And then the third thing is, as we're doing those two, if we can innovate and actually create new things or push our engineering to the edge and get them to think outside the box and create net new capability that could be useful for other customers, that's always interesting to us. So if those 3 factors play out, we're more than happy to discuss and engage and collaborate. So
that's great. So, probably half of our audience, I think Shannon mentioned, are nonprofit companies that are probably really interested and have probably lots of great ideas for how they could help meet the 3 criteria that you have and start thinking about an innovative partnership. And so I'd love to dig in a little bit more in terms of as nonprofit organizations, we need to be thinking a little more empathetically about, okay, what are the pain points that a bigger company is trying to face, and think about how do we bring the well-crafted challenge to them. But there's also other opportunities to look out for. And so I'll just briefly share one of our experiences. So a number of years ago, actually, we started working with Intel and Grameen around a couple of different product developments. So one of them was Intel was building this bangle to monitor the exposure of air pollution for women. And it was this really exciting, magical opportunity because Nextleaf works with communities in India and Nigeria, women who are exposed to smoke because of the simple act of cooking. And so we brought a lot of, as Sri was talking about, subject area expertise to this partnership. And it was very much this mutual beneficial partnership where we worked together. And now there's this bangle that now Nextleaf and working with a number of other partners are starting to scale up and expand. And this brings benefit to sort of all the partners in this project. And so as you think about, Sri, working with other organizations, and what are sort of some of the areas where Amazon's interested, and AWS is interested in sort of growing into, I mean, you're responsible for government, nonprofits, universities. I mean, you have so many different collaborations and partnerships in your division. Can you talk about sort of some of the sort of new areas that you see in IoT? And specifically, if you could talk a little bit more about the product development process and that customization in the social impact space. So, you know, we could use Alexa as an example, where you guys have done so much in terms of thinking about translation, but there's a lot of other sort of avenues as you think about taking products to emerging markets. How do you think about these types of partnerships, and how do you think about product customization in a way to meet the sort of challenges in different emerging markets?
Okay. So let me start with the types of customers that we work with. Even though the title up there says public sector, in our definition, public sector is broader than just governmental organizations. So yes, we do work with government organizations around the world, starting all the way from state and local municipal level up to central governments, federal governments, defense, intelligence, and so on. But then we also work with educational institutions. So these are K through 20 and beyond that are primarily focused on educating the next generation individuals and professionals, right? So whether it's in the traditional K-20 system or vocational schools outside of the traditional system and so on. And then we also work with NPOs and NGOs, customers like World Bank and others, where the mission is different than what a commercial or a private sector company would be focused on. All in all, if you look at the public sector space, once again, the broader definition of public sector, it's different than how a commercial company looks at an opportunity or a product, right? So in commercial sense, their primary motive is to get more revenue, get more through the sales, make the profit or increase the profit, drive more adoption, and that's their primary objective. And they have reasons why they need to do that. They have stakeholders, shareholders, and so on. When you go into the non-private sector space, it's more mission-oriented, right? So you're focused on solving a problem because it's the right thing to do. If you are in the government, you have to provide services to your citizens. You need to be transparent. You need to make sure that you're taking care of all of your citizens. You need to be as cost-effective with your operations as possible so that you can use those excess funds, if possible, for other reasons. And similarly, if you're in the educational space, your mission is to try and educate and move that needle in terms of the quality of education that students are getting. Similarly, NPO, depending on what your mission statement is, you may be in the healthcare space or you may be in the environmental space, right? So it tends to be more of a mission-oriented. So that's one major distinction as to when we look at private sector versus public sector, we see that being slightly different. Across the board on the public sector side, there are, once again, generalizing this a bit, but two main reasons why customers look to AWS or any other provider in this space to try and innovate. The first one is cost reduction. So if I can save and do something for less, I can use that excess funding for other beneficial projects. If you're a government, once again, if you save money here, you can probably put it somewhere else for other reasons. So, second reason is efficiency, right? So you want to drive efficiency into your operations. You want to make sure you're providing services that are more real-time or more appropriate for the constituents' needs versus the old legacy way of doing things. So those tend to be the primary drivers as to why public sector organizations work with what we do and what we offer in the cloud. In terms of the product ideation and how things happen at AWS, and I'm going to use this across the board for Amazon because it's the same exact process that we go through. We start with, we have a thing called working backwards concept, right? So We start with the customer and a problem that the customer is expressing, or perhaps an opportunity space that the customer is interested in getting into, and we work our way backwards. Before we write a single line of code on any product, any hardware engagement that we get into, or any space that we get into, we write an internal press release. This is almost, we don't obviously release this press release out, but this is almost, we're expressing that Amazon or AWS is announcing something, and these are the reasons why that something is valuable to you, the customer, right? And the reason why we do that is, by doing that, we're forcing our engineering teams, our leadership teams, to think through all the way to the end state and make sure that whatever it is that we're trying to do is actually valuable. Because very often what we have seen in the past, and it still happens at other companies, brilliant idea on day one, you go burn through resources, 6 months, 12 months down the road, you end up with a product and nobody wants it, right? So we want to avoid that if possible right at the beginning. So that's one. We also do PR FAQs. This is, once again, we go to the next level of explaining what each and every feature does. Why is it valuable? Why should you care? So the more of why should you care, just because Amazon released something, so what? So we're trying to address that with these 2 documents. So that's the first checkpoint. Next, we have teams that are constituted, they're put together with the concept of a 2-pizza team. The idea here is that no team should be more than enough people, so generally 6 to 8 people, that could be fed by 2 pizzas. Because if it's bigger than that, then all of a sudden you get bureaucracy, you get different points of view, not necessarily in the negative way, but contention. You don't get the unity that you want to move aggressively. And we have thousands of those. So besides putting together these 2 pizza box teams, we also completely authorize them to go operate whatever it is that they need to do to make that initiative happen. Right? So start from requirements, work with the customers, get those feedback loops going so that we understand where and how customers want this capability to exist. We then empower those teams to go build that iteratively. We don't do waterfall software, typical software lifecycle models. We iterate very rapidly because we know whatever we release at the end of the day, it's just the start line for us, because that's when the real work begins. We don't see product launches as a finish line, unlike other companies. So we iterate really fast, including that team being responsible for operating that, designing that capability, operating that capability, and eventually supporting customers and iterating on that into the future. So we have thousands of these teams that operate autonomously, and that's the reason why you probably hear and see a lot of innovation coming from Amazon in general. Yeah.
So I think when you're Amazon or Google, you have the resources to be able to do things pro bono or low cost in service of mission. But you have a lot of new sensor and data providers, CubeSat folks, coming up who are looking for successful business models that let them donate data and services to the sort of nonprofit social sector, and they're trying to figure out how to make it work financially. What advice do you have for sort of mid-level data sensor providers to engage without, failing on the bottom line?
So we do have, so the idea, just to make sure that I understand the question, right? So sensor providers that are collecting data, let's say, I'll make this up, but let's say it's air quality data in a particular location. They're doing that already. They want to share that data for greater good, perhaps innovation to happen on top of the data. Is that the right question? Okay. It doesn't have to be air quality. It could be anything that's sensor or non-sensor based. So we have an initiative at AWS called public data sets. So this is the idea here is if there is a collection of data that is useful for greater good, we will be more than happy to host it and provide it to anyone that's interested in using that free of charge. Right? So that, once again, the idea here is that data set should be useful for others, not just it's something that I think is valuable. It should be actually useful for others. So we have lots of such data sets. We host, in fact, significant volume and size of data sets, whether it's weather data, health-related data, GIS data, and we're starting to see more and more sensor-ingested data starting to make its way in, where if that data could be useful for other communities, other companies to leverage and build upon, absolutely. More than happy to do that. So,
great. So I wanted to actually go back to the previous point. So you talked about how a single team is actually responsible for design, conceptualization, design. And so can you talk a little bit about how that individual team might work with an organization in the room today to kind of go through all of those steps? And I think actually, just going back to the question that was asked, I think it's a really interesting one in terms of a profit question as well. And so how does AWS kind of see the profit question in these types of product development partnerships? How does AWS think about it? Where does it fall on the priority line in terms of profitability and sort of the need to drive the bottom line when you're thinking about these types of partnerships with other nonprofit organizations, for example?
Yeah, so we operate services at scale that allows us to, number one, control our costs. We're not only operating at scale, so when I talk about millions of customers, that gives us the scale and economy that we can operate those services at very low cost, right? So that's one, which means our operational costs tend to be significantly lower than perhaps other locations that can offer that. The second is we're innovating on top of it. So when you talk about a particular project that may be something that you're interested in pursuing with AWS, and our motive being that we're a commercial company, right? So we're absolutely open to diving into that situation, understanding what it is that you're trying to do, figuring out the right model for that, right? So there's not a this or no type of a check, right? So it's always subject to what is the use case, what's the ultimate impact that solution is going to drive. And if it's the right thing, our teams are absolutely open to collaborate. And it goes beyond just the cost and operational burden side of it, right? It's more on the engineering side as well, where I talked about those two pizza teams. Those teams have direct link and talk to customers almost daily, which is something unique that doesn't happen in a lot of companies, right? These are teams that are operating services that sit in the cloud that customers are using. But those teams talk to customers, understand what's working, what's not working, in terms of how do they want to change things up, right? So that we can iterate and add those features so that it becomes easier for customers in the long run. The other thing I'll mention is when we also, this is something I want to mention earlier, product development. We know, I mentioned that launch is the start line for us. The other approach that we also look at is when we're launching things, it has to have an API backend. If it doesn't, we're not launching. The reason for that is we know that no matter how many views we have at that set of requirements and we think we understand all of the needs of that service or capability, there's going to be gaps in it. And the only way we can allow that to happen and move forward is if it's API driven so that we allow customers to expand and extend that capability easily into whatever it is that they want to do. This is a good example where you mentioned earlier Alexa, right? So when Alexa launched, and even now, Alexa has some core capabilities that it brings to bear out of the box. But the backend and the way it's architected is customers, you can build your own skills and extend what Alexa can do out of the box. We have, in fact, more than 30,000 such skills added in the last couple of years and growing very rapidly. This is where, while the core service allows you to get from point A to point B, you can then pick up and move as fast and as custom as you want in ways and things that maybe are not on the priority list for us initially. So that's extensibility is something that we absolutely focus on. API backend for sure. The one thing I'll also quickly touch, even though you didn't cover this, which is security, right? This is an area where, especially if you're a small emerging company, right, startups, NPO, or you don't have a lot of resources, unfortunately, security tends to be at the bottom of the prioritization list, right? You want to get the features out, you want to get the product out, and security tends to fall below the line. And this is an area where we don't believe that you should compromise on security. We do a lot of things to support that. We bake security into everything that we do. There is no questions, ifs, or buts. In fact, recently we decided that encryption in transit and at rest of data shouldn't be a cost prohibitor for companies to be not doing it. There is no reason. So we made encryption at rest and in transit default on everything that we do at no cost to customers, right? So options and ways where we make it easier for customers to operate on top of the platform. Extensibility is going to be key on day one, because that's how you move faster beyond where we stop and evolve on top of it.
Great. So just in the last minute here, I wanted to talk a little bit more about customization. So at Nextleaf, we think a lot about how do we get the voice of a woman who's living in a village and she has a preference around the stove that she's using, the energy that she's accessing. How do we get that voice back all the way to the development of a product and bring that feedback in? And that's where, for us, the IoT and the data platform becomes so crucial. And so, actually, I think we are out of time. But I would definitely encourage you to talk with Sri afterwards, because I think there's some really interesting things that AWS is doing to try to sort of take this feedback through partnerships like the ones that we're talking about here, and both build some of that customization back into AWS and push the platform, but also kind of putting it back on us as well to own some of that customization and building the ecosystem in a way that we can then take it, we can customize and continue to sort of bring that scale. So thank you so much. It's been great. And thank you guys for having us.
I'm going to be